Welcome back to another episode of Projecting Grandeur. I'm your host, Ron Dichter. Thanks for tuning in today. Appreciate everybody who's been watching and all your support. Today I want to talk about a concept that's, I don't think, unique and certainly something that you've heard before, but it's about working on versus working in the business. And let me just explain this for those of you that don't understand what that means, and then I'll talk about why I want to talk about that today. So the concept of working in the business means that you're working on the day-to-day. You're tackling, the tasks at hand for the day. You're dealing with the very near-term stuff, that's almost reactionary for the business. Not always reactionary. Sometimes it's just the day-to-day blocking and tackling. But working on the business is when you're spending time being more strategic rather than tactical. You're looking at things from maybe a higher vantage point, things that are a little bit further out, whether it is, planning the next quarter, the next year, something in the future of a product. And when you think about an entrepreneur, obviously you can't spend all of your time working in the business because, well, you're not going to grow, right? You're just going to be focused on the day-to-day stuff, but you can't spend all your time working on the business either, because you need to make sure that the day-to-day stuff is happening for that long-term vision stuff to come to fruition. But when you're in startup mode and you're a entrepreneur wearing many, in some cases all, the hats in the business, the concept of working on the business is more hopeful than realistic. And many times you'll get through the day where you'll feel like you did nothing because you were so busy working in the business that there was no time to really focus on the long-term strategy of the business. And that's a really hard place to be as an entrepreneur. And many of you have heard, like, an entrepreneur not only wears a lot of hats, but works countless hours. This whole concept of, I'm going to go start my own business and I'm going to have all this free time to do what I want. Well, that's not actually how it plays out. You actually find yourself working more hours than when maybe you were an employee for another company, because you are wearing all those hats. And then again, that's only working in the business. Then you have to find out how to carve time to work on the business, which for many entrepreneurs basically means nights and weekends where you spend time doing strategic stuff, and your 8 to 5 or whatever hours you work is tending to be working more tactically in the business. So as you think about the importance of a new startup, obviously both are important, right? As I said, you have to work in the business so that you can actually get to the goals of working on the business, which is that future planning, vision planning kind of stuff. So how do you do this? And so for me, I've worked in a bunch of different capacities. As I mentioned before, I recently left a business that I had a lot of employees, and I had a lot of time to think about things where I can work on the business. And I had an executive team that we could sit down and we could carve out time, and we did that. Once a quarter, we would sit down for strategic conversations about long-term planning, and also in the same quarter, on a different time frame, we would spend time working on kind of more strategic work in the business thing. So more process-oriented. How do we make improvements incrementally today to move it? But as I move into my new business that's very much a startup, how do I get time to do that? And this is really where I just have to carve out time in my day. And so typically what I do is I'll get into the office around 6:45 or 7 every day, and I spend the first hour to hour and 15 minutes of my day only working on long-term strategic, on the business type activities. And I intentionally don't check emails or don't check for anything that's going on in the business mode, because if I do, I'm going to get sucked into that vortex and I'm not going to be able to spend the time to work on the business. So carving out time in your day is essential. So my personal time, again, is I take about an hour to an hour and a half every morning, and then I also carve out about 3 hours on Saturday and 3 hours on Sunday in the morning. Since I'm an early riser, it's really easy for me to do it before my wife gets up. And so typically I'll keep that same schedule of getting up at 4 in the morning every day. But then on the weekends, I still get up at 4, but now I'm focused, instead of going to the office, I'm focused on carving out that 3-hour block, sometimes it's 2-hour block, to really focus on strategic thinking. And this is a really important thing that a lot of people don't do, especially, again, if you're an entrepreneur, you're wearing a ton of hats, you're really focused on in the business activities, and it's very hard for you to decouple yourself, because if you don't do it, nobody is going to do it, right? So it's paramount for that stuff to get done. But again, if all you do is spend your time in the business, you'll never really grow, because you're going to be so focused on, you know, the minutia of running the business, and there won't be any strategic thinking involved. So carving out the time is essential. That's the first step in doing it. The second thing is really building an outline for yourself. You know, obviously you have some abstract thoughts around what you want the business to do, and you have to think about, you know, things from kind of the like hypothesis of like where are you going long term and what are some of the things you need to do, but then kind of really you know, boiling that down to, you know, like actionable thematic things that you can do that create a, you know, short term, a midterm, and a long term roadmap for you. Because, you know, obviously you can't be thinking in the clouds all the time where you're talking about this, you know, whether it be a revenue goal that you want to hit that's so far out there, or whether it's a product goal or a, you know, again, any of these very, very future thought processes are part of your thought, you know, that you should be thinking about, but you can't create goals that are so far out there that there's no iterative near-term and mid-term steps to hit that. So as I carve out that time, the other thing that I do is I really try to unpack, you know, almost like chapters in a book as to what I want to accomplish. Yes, I have that long-term goal, that future aspirational, this is what we're going to do, but then I say, okay, like, what do I need? Well, like, what are the incremental things from a product, from a delivery, from a sales, from a revenue? Like, what are these things that need to happen, you know, along the way for these things to happen? And so then my long-term thinking starts to become more midterm thinking to get to those long-term goals. And so that's really the way I try to spend my time. Is I carve out time. It's precious. I don't let that time get interrupted. And then the second thing that I do is really focus on making sure the time that I do carve out is used appropriately on not just long-term thinking, but also mid-term thinking and even near-term thinking. And then the rest of my time is spent doing tactical, you know, in the trenches type of work, so that we can actually do the necessary activity to hit those, you know, short, mid, and long-term goals. And I think this is an important thing. And, you know, again, everybody always talks about the concept of working in versus on the business, but they don't talk about the concept of what that means in practical application. And I think today my goal is to really give everyone a understanding of what practical application of this means, and how you can take a concept like working on the business versus working in the business and putting it into rubber meets road, where you create an action plan around it. And anyone who's listened to this podcast for any duration of time knows that I'm all about creating plans and actions so that you can obviously accomplish your goals. So take away from today, again, understand the difference between working in and on the business. Understand if you're going to be spending time working on the business, that you need to carve out time so that you actually do it and hold that time precious. And the time that you do carve out to work on the business, make sure that you have a roadmap of what you want to talk to yourself about as you're whiteboarding this out, and what you hope to accomplish both from short, near, mid, and long-term goals, so that you can use that time effectively. And then last but certainly not least, when you're working in the business, make sure that you are obviously learning from some of the things that are going on, so that if you are spending time in that strategic thought, that you can actually use that time to maybe learn from some of these near-term, you know, in the trenches stuff that you're working on, to create a better roadmap of how to use that time effectively. So anyway, I hope you find this helpful. Hope you can apply this to your business and your day. Again, I'm all about using your time effectively, so I hope this is helpful. Thanks again for tuning in. Thanks for being a part of this. Don't forget to like and comment, and please share. Love to get the message out there, help as many future and current entrepreneurs as we can, because we are going to change the world together. Have a great day.